Hi everyone, welcome back to my nutrition education videos. This is video 3 talking about fat. If you haven't seen the first 2 videos talking about the digestion and absorption of carbohydrates and proteins, I recommend stopping this video and going back to carbohydrates and then to proteins before watching this video. And if you have seen both of those videos, let's jump in and start talking about the fat digestion and absorption. So just like the other 2 macronutrients, fat has such an important role within our bodies. All of our cell membranes are made up of fat. We have a phospholipid bilayer, which means this layer keeps the water within the cell and it also keeps water outside of the cell where it needs to be so that each of our cells can function properly and move through the body. So when we talk about the buildup of the fat molecule within our body, we need to look at the structure. So when we talk about fats, we're going to have a glycerol backbone, so it's going to be like a straight chain right there. And then we're going to have 3 fatty acid chains coming off to the side. And the length of those chains can differ, and that's what makes up the differences of fat molecules. Each of those 3 chains can be short, medium, or long in length, and they also can be saturated or unsaturated. So if you've ever seen on a nutrition label where when you look at it under the fat category, there's saturated and then poly and mono unsaturated fat and also trans fat. But that's what's talking about the buildup of this molecule. If a product has saturated fat in it, that means that hydrogen ions were put into the molecule. If it's an unsaturated fat, that means that there are no hydrogen ions within that fatty acid chain. This is important to note because the type of fat, whether it's saturated or unsaturated, has different effects within our bodies. A good rule of thumb is saturated fats are solid at room temperature. It's important to note the differences between a saturated and an unsaturated fat because they have different properties within our body. Some good and some not so good. And the last type of fat that I'll just briefly talk about is trans fat. It actually should not be on any nutrition label. It's actually illegal. And so if you do see any trans fat, I really highly recommend to just put the product away. Trans fat specifically is a man-made processed fat, so our bodies really can't regulate it like other fat molecules. We also need to talk about essential fatty acids. So just like the essential amino acids in the protein molecule, our bodies can't create these essential fatty acids, so we need to have them within our diet. So our first essential fatty acid is linoleic acid, and these are omega-6s. Our next type of essential fatty acid is our alpha linoleic acid, and these are omega-3s. Our omegas can be found in avocados, butter, meats, eggs, and so many more foods containing fat, and we really need to make sure that we're having these within our diet. So if you've watched my other 2 videos on macronutrients, you know that carbohydrate is our fastest digesting, protein is our kind of medium digesting, and then our fat is our slowest digesting macronutrient. This is important to note because it is important to have fat in your diet throughout your day so that you are feeling full and satisfied at each meal and snack. It's important to note with that feeling full, it actually takes a little bit longer for our bodies to realize that we're full with the fat. Since it is a little bit slower to digest, I really recommend if you have a higher fatty meal to eat slowly or maybe kind of portion back the sizing a little bit just because it does take a little bit longer for you to feel that fullness from a high fat food. It's important to note the digestion of fat is really active in the intestine. There's a process called emulsification that really helps digest that fat molecule so that we can absorb it across the intestinal lining. To get that full digestion of our fat molecules, we have to have bile salts. And bile salts are created in the liver, but then they're stored in the gallbladder. And to fully digest that fat molecule, we have to get that glycerol backbone away from these 3 fatty acid chains. Once those fats are broken down a little bit, pancreatic lipase is able to come and kind of finish off the job of the fat digestion. Once that pancreatic lipase enzyme has done its job, now the fatty acids that are in very small molecules can be absorbed through the microvilli, through the intestinal wall, and absorbed into our bloodstream. So when we eat them and digest them in our GI tract, we have to break them down into small fatty acids so that they can be absorbed across the intestinal lining. But once they're in our bloodstream, past that lining, they actually reform into that full fatty acid molecule with the glycerol backbone and the 3 fatty acid tails. Once the fatty acids are reformed into the triglycerides, so that bigger body, they're attached to a protein to then be moved throughout the body wherever they need to be. The main end goal of fatty acids or triglycerides can be for storage for energy. So they can go to our liver, to tissues, to muscles, and many other places to be utilized whenever we need them. So that was an overview of triglyceride and fatty acid, digestion, and absorption. And I think fats have quite hype right now with the ketogenic diet. And this video is not about ketogenic, but I just want you to know that all macronutrients are important for our body. Carbohydrates, proteins, and fats each have their part in our body's digestion and really just running of our whole entire body. So it really is important to not favor one macronutrient over the other and have a really balanced diet with each macronutrient. But we do want to look for those unsaturated over saturated. So if a saturated fat is filled with hydrogen ions, it's going to be a little bit thicker. So like our butter can stay at room temperature in a stick. Think of that going through your blood versus olive oil. That's very runny, very fluid. That's an unsaturated fat. So it's not saturated with those hydrogen ions, so it can be liquid at room temperature. So kind of just think of the two running through your blood, and maybe that can be a visual reminder that unsaturated are the ones we want to look for. So I hope this video on fat digestion and absorption was beneficial to your learning. And if you get through all 3 videos, you really should have a good understanding or the base understanding of what a carbohydrate, protein, and fat molecule does within the body and why each of these macronutrients are important to have within our diet each and every day. That's all I have for you right now. I hope to see you in my next nutrition video. Have a great day.